And of course you could apply that to both oscillators. Except of course that one's still switched into sample and hold. Which is quite nice. Now another way you can use this is if you use it as a subtle effect with this slider much lower, so there's very little change in pitch. You can get notes that will start off in tune and then go slightly out of tune when you hold them, or start off out of tune and then go quickly into tune. So for example, we've got a bit of attack set on here. Let's actually just get the oscillators back in tune. And I can't remember which was in tune and which isn't. Oh, great. So anyone out there with perfect pitch, tough luck. So let's affect the pitch a bit. So now they're out of tune, but they start off in tune, and the time it takes to go out of tune is determined by the attack. So if you play quite quick, short staccato like that, it'll be in tune, but if you sustain a note, it'll then go out of tune. And of course we could address this by retuning the oscillators relative to each other when you're holding it down. And so this means that it'll start off out of tune, and then at a rate determined by the attack, it will gradually drift into tune. So if you play staccato, it'll always be out of tune. You sustain notes, they'll be in tune. That is not set particularly subtly. You could shorten the attack time more, you could have less envelope control of the pitch of VCO1 and make it more subtle, but you can sort of vary the sound over time like that, subtly fatten things up for the attack, or have a quick attack and then subtly fatten it up. Yeah, there's plenty of scope there. And whilst we're talking about subtly changing the sound, you can do the same with the sample and hold. It doesn't have to be a really noticeable effect on the pitch of one or both oscillators. So for example, let's move, and of course they're now out of tune again. So, with the oscillators back in tune, let's apply a bit of sample and hold. That's not a little, that's a lot. And I mean, even that amount there is quite noticeable. And depending on how much you apply, you might want to just retune the oscillators relative to each other. But you're going to get a bit of a change of the pitch of one relative to the other, and that will sort of fatten up the sound a bit. But I don't want to stray too much into sample and hold at the moment. There's other cool things you can do with it. I'll come back to that later on. Now, one thing so far that I've ignored completely with the oscillators is the switch is up here just to the right of the coarse and fine frequency sliders. And I'm going to continue to ignore one of those for the time being, but we'll look at the one for VCO2. This is marked sync, off or on, and this is quite a common effect that you get on synths, where one oscillator is synchronized to the other one. And what this means is that the waveform of VCO2 is reset at a frequency that is dictated by the frequency VCO1. So every time VCO1 resets, VCO2 is forced to reset as well. And what that means is, because it's dictated by the frequency VCO1, the frequency is its pitch. So the pitch of VCO2 is governed by the pitch of VCO1. However, the waveform of VCO2 can be doing its own thing in the meantime until it gets reset next. And what that means is that you can get a very complex waveform on VCO2, but the pitch is dictated by VCO1. And it's the complexity that gives sync its characteristic sound. So let's pull down VCO1, switch sync on, and so far it doesn't actually really sound any different, but that's because we're not doing anything with the pitch of VCO2 relative to the pitch of VCO1, which is actually controlling the pitch of VCO2. So let's play around with the frequency sliders. So as you can hear, the pitch is the same. It's the pitch of VCO1. But as I move the frequency sliders change the pitch of VCO2, the effect it has is to change the timbre. Now, that gets a bit tiresome, moving sliders around all the time, wearing them out, making them go stiff. So you can use any of the frequency modulation controls of VCO2 to do that for you. So let's use the sine wave. Move up the LFO control. Which is okay, but it's just moving backwards and forwards in the way that LFO control things do. We could have sample and hold mixer control, but I'm going to ignore that and come back to it later. With the other slider, we can of course use the envelope to vary the pitch of the oscillator, and that's possibly the best modulation to use to get sort of classic sync sweep sounds. But not when it drives things out of the audio range. So let's play around with the envelope. Bring the sustain down. Actually bring the ADSR control of the pitch down. And you get some almost vocal formant type sounds when you've got it in the bass end of the spectrum. So that can get you some really quite interesting bass sounds. It can get you some really nice interesting sounds full stop, not just bass sounds. So that's a cool effect. That's the syncing Oscillator 2 to the pitch of Oscillator 1, and then doing weird things to the pitch of VCO2 to change the timbre of it. All this time we've had VCO2 set on square wave. You could have it set on sawtooth and get completely different timbres out of it. And of course, if you've got it set on square wave, you can do things with the pulse width. Almost endless possibilities there. So that is pretty much all the capabilities of the oscillators on the ARP Odyssey. Except for one thing.